Finance Core, Topic 9, Financial Risk Management, Mitigation, and Financial Derivative Contracts. Readings are Chapter 17 on Options. So our first learning objective is to apply the IMM Risk Management Framework. So IMM is a way or process to manage risk in an organization. IMM stands for Identify, Measure, Mitigate. In the first step, you try to understand through identification what are the factors that affect the viability of an enterprise. So what keeps you up at night? So once you have identified what your risks are, the next step is to measure them. And for an organization, that's going to be a measurement of how they affect cash flows and profitability. And some of these things we've done before. We're going to do worst case and best case scenarios, hypothetical and historical scenarios, factor sensitivities using data tables, break-even analysis, and then a new concept which is going to be stochastic measures, and we're going to do earnings at risk. We're not going to cover simulation in this topic. Now that you've identified what your exposures are, you've measured how they impact your business, and the last step is you're going to decide how to mitigate them. Although when I say mitigate, the first step is you might just accept the risk. You may just eliminate the risk by getting out of that business somehow or use a contract. Hedge the risk by taking, say, a position that eliminates the risk, or just hold capital. So, and that's related to also accepting the risk. You might decide that I'm going to accept the risk, but you know what? I'm going to keep a rainy day fund, a lot of cash on hand in case that bad thing happens. So the example I'm going to do is a Hoffman gold mine. This comes from a series on the Discovery Channel called Gold Rush, and it follows these gentlemen that try to do gold mining in the Yukon. And if you're interested in this, it's a brief video. It's kind of promoting their upcoming season. So if you go to your spreadsheet, but I'll just show you here, is a single point estimate and a base case or forecasted cash flows for Todd based on watching the season 1 and then thinking about what could happen in season 2. So my base case forecast, or my expected value, is they're going to spend $200,000 in labor. They're going to use equipment operating leases of $88,000 for the season. They're going to have 150 days possible to mine. That's because they go to the Yukon where the ground is generally frozen. So on average, about 150 days a year, they're able to dig in the ground to find the gold. However, of those 150 days, they average a 75% actual mining. So that could be setup time, equipment failures, some drama in the show. So in the end, they only wind up, I'm going to forecast they're going to wind up mining 113 days. I'm going to assume that each day they mine, they're going to get 12 tons of pay dirt per day. So let's talk about the process of gold mining a little bit. So the idea of gold mining is you go to a stretch of land that doesn't have that much value economically, and what you do is you first use a bulldozer and you just take the topsoil away until the point you get to the harder dirt, which is mixed with rocks, that's sitting on top of the bedrock. Since gold is a heavier metal, over millions of years it's kind of settled on that dirt that's sitting on top of the bedrock. So on average they're going to get about 12 tons of pay dirt per day times the number of days. That'll give them 1,350 tons of pay dirt, and that pay dirt's going to go to a wash plant. So again, you get the topsoil removed, you get the pay dirt, that kind of clay type dirt sitting on top of the bedrock that may contain gold, and on average they find about 0.25 ounces of gold per ton of pay dirt. So that's going to give them 338 ounces of gold. That's my forecast. Their major expense, besides the least expense of the equipment and the labor cost, is the fuel to operate the bulldozers and the wash plants. I should explain what a wash plant is. The wash plant is where you take the pay dirt and you put in this machine, and the machine is basically a conveyor belt, and the conveyor belt shakes the dirt and kind of power washes it. And what happens is the heavier gold gets collected in these bins, and then that's how you get it. And then you discard the rest of the dirt. So you're going to run about 200 gallons of fuel per day at a forecast of 405 which was the goal, which was the fuel price last year, and I'm going to assume just a 2% appreciation of fuel prices for this year, and we're going to assume a 30% tax rate. My assumption is that gold prices are currently $1,600. They will appreciate 2% by the end of the year, just kind of an estimate of inflation. So I'm assuming gold prices are going to be $1,632 by the end of the season. So if I take my 338 ounces of gold times my $1,632 per ounce, that's going to assume they make $550,800 this season. Their operating expense of $88,000 for equipment, labor, fuel prices is number of gallons times number of days times the price of fuel. So that's going to give them an EBITDA of $169,000. They have no depreciation. There's no CapEx. Everything's in OpEx. Got my taxes, subtract it. So I'm forecasting $118,000 of operating profit after tax. There's no depreciation, no CapEx, and we'll assume no working capital to make things simple. So EBIT after tax is the same thing as free cash flows. So the question is, should Hoffman do this? Well, you imagine that any big decision in life, you need to think about more than what's expected. You think about what could happen. And one way of thinking about risk management is a process of thinking about or asking what could happen, not what's expected to happen. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our IMM framework. We're going to identify the major exposures to Todd Hoffman's gold mine or gold operations. We're going to try to measure using all these tools how much money they could lose. And then lastly, we'll talk about how they would hedge the risk. So here's the spreadsheet. We'll talk about it first, and then we'll jump to the spreadsheet and do a couple data tables. So here's the base case scenario. In the first column, talking about Todd expected to make free cash flows of $118,000. And then I've identified what could go wrong. Now, so the first step in the IMM process is identify what could go wrong. And I've identified 4 main risks for gold mining. For gold mining, that would be a decline in gold prices, low gold content, so the location you've selected doesn't have a lot of gold in the ground, a long winter, which makes the ground hard and you won't be able to mine as many days, and an increase in fuel prices. So I identified these as the 4 main drivers of profitability and cash flows. So my worst case scenario is the season shorter due to weather. They have more equipment failures, so they're operating even less days. There's less gold content in the ground, only 0.1 ounces per ton of pay dirt. Diesel fuel increases by 40%. Gold prices decrease by 40%. And then in this worst case scenario, they lose $211,000. In the best case scenario, everything goes right. You have a short winter. You have a lot of gold in the ground, 0.3 ounces versus 0.25. Fuel prices fall, gold prices go up, and you make $700,000. And then I did some hypothetical scenarios. What if there's a global economic boom? Again, this is just me thinking about what would happen in that type of economy. It doesn't affect the weather, so that's all the same. It doesn't affect how much gold you find. However, if there's an economic boom, it's probably going to drive up the price of fuel by 20%. And economic booms tend to be bad for gold, which are generally held when the markets are doing poorly. So I think an economic boom would generally be bad for gold mining. And then I did a historical scenario. In 1981, the Fed, in order to tame inflation, raised interest rates. And in that environment, I didn't touch any of the environmental factors, but in that environment, we had fuel prices falling 8% in that year, and gold prices falling 25% in that year as the Fed raised interest rates and people moved out of gold and into, say, bank CDs. And then I did one more hypothetical scenario, a long winter. So all I did is decrease the number of days and found that free cash flows were $76,000. So I have my worst case, best case scenarios. I have my hypotheticals of a global boom and a long winter, and a historical scenario of a 1981 economic environment in which interest rates went up and gold prices went down and fuel prices went down. And so you can see I have a graph in the top right corner that the worst case scenario is losing $211,000. I lose more money on those I lose some money on the hypothetical and historical scenarios, and the best case scenario is again gold prices way up, fuel prices way down. So next thing I like to do is to use tables to do 1 and 2 variable sensitivity analysis. So I'm going to go to the spreadsheet. I'm going to click on scenarios. And you can see that my base case is in column B, all the values. And over here I have a data table starting in, what is that, I-15. And what I have here is I have links to the base case revenue, EBITDA, and free cash flow. So it's my base case revenue, EBITDA, and free cash flow. And I want to see how all those are affected from just gold appreciation going plus or minus 20%. So I'm going to select that data. I'm going to go data, what if, data table. This is a one factor in which the factors are in columns. So where it says column input cell, I'm going to put the original gold price appreciation in my base case, which is in B21, and hit OK. So now what you see in the data table are all the scenarios of gold prices from plus 20, plus 10, plus 2, minus 10, and minus 20%, and how that affects revenue, EBITDA, and free cash flow. And if I look at the row where it has a 2% appreciation, that is my base case. And the second thing I'll do is a data table. Notice I have a link to the free cash flow in the base case. And I want to see how that just free cash flows are affected by both gold appreciation and amount of gold per ton of dirt. So I'm going to select all of the data and hit data, what if, data table, where it says row input cell. The row is gold ounces, and that's the 0.25 in B12. Column input is plus or minus 20% of gold appreciation. So I'm going to put in that B21, hit OK. And now I have my scenarios of gold ounces varying from 0.1 ounces to 0.4 ounces per ton, and gold plus or minus 20%. The center of that data table is my base case of making 118. And what you see from that data table, the worst case scenarios are when gold prices are down and there's not a lot of gold, and that's where they lose the most money. Best case scenarios are where gold is up 20% and gold content is also up. And then I have some break-even analysis. So break-even analysis, as long as they find 0.17 ounces of gold per ton, that would be varying the value in B12, they would exactly have free cash flows of 0. So they're expecting 0.25 ounces of gold, but if they have 0.17, they break even. Let's do gold appreciation. They're expecting gold, or my model has gold appreciating 2%. What appreciation of gold or depreciation will make them have free cash flows of 0 or break even? So I'm going to hit data, or first I'll delete that question mark. I'll hit data, what if, goal seek. I want to set the base case free cash flow in B38 to a value of 0 by changing the value in the base case input for gold appreciation, which is B21, hit OK. And what you see there in cell B21 is negative 29.45%. I'm going to hit cancel, and I'm going to type in negative 29.45% is now my break-even appreciation of gold. So as long as gold doesn't fall by more than 29%, I'll have free cash flows of 0 or greater. And then the last one you can check for yourself, but when fuel prices go up 188%, you break even. So it's not too sensitive to fuel prices. Fuel prices can almost double. And the last measure we're going to do is earnings at risk, and we'll do that in the next section. So in this section, we have estimated, we've applied the IMM framework to gold mining in the Yukon. We've identified our exposure, we've measured our exposure, and later we're going to start talking about mitigation. However, in the next topic, let's just talk about earnings at risk, our last measure.